Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle and welcome to the National Parks Expedition Challenge. Today we're in Washington, D.C., outside of the Peterson House, which is across the street from the Ford's Theater National Historic Site. So we're going to be talking to Ranger Lauren today. Ranger Lauren, thank you for having us here.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you guys coming out.
Well, we're excited. We're actually standing outside of the Peterson House, but before we talk about this amazing place, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to the national park?
Yeah, I actually initially started with the National Park Service as a volunteer. From there, I worked in an AmeriCorps position up at Catoctin Mountain Park, which is a natural resource park in the National Park Service. I helped run their volunteer program, then worked as a seasonal ranger. And then I've been down here at the National Mall and Ford's Theater for about 2 years.
Well, we're very glad that you ended up here. So we are standing outside of the Peterson House, which is across the street from the Ford's Theater. Tell us about this place in general. Tell us about the Ford's Theater.
Yeah, so Ford's Theater was built in 1863. It is most well known for the assassination of President Lincoln, which occurred here on April 14th in 1865. We are currently an active theater. We typically have 4 major performances a year. The idea behind those performances is Abraham Lincoln loved the theater, he loved Shakespeare, he loved comedies, so we want to keep the theater as a place he would have loved and enjoyed.
So can you tell us what happened here on April 14th, 1865?
Yeah, so that was the night that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. His assassin was John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor, as big as Hollywood's biggest stars today. Booth had been plotting for over a year with 6 other co-conspirators to initially kidnap the president, and then as the South is losing the war, the kidnapping plot morphs towards a murder plot. And in addition to President Lincoln being targeted, both Secretary of State Seward and Vice President Johnson were targeted that night.
So when Lincoln comes to the theater, where does he sit? Who's with him? And how did this happen?
Yeah, so the night of the assassination, President Lincoln is sitting up in the presidential box. Booth comes to the theater and leaves his horse out back. He then makes his way up to the presidential box. There's a gentleman standing outside the door of the presidential box. He's not security or anything like that. He's a White House messenger. Booth shows him a piece of paper, most likely a calling card identifying who he was, and thinking, why wouldn't the president want to meet this famous actor? Booth is let right into the box.
And then
he actually, being an actor, he's familiar with the play going on. It's a play called Our American Cousin. It's a British comedy, and he's waiting for a very specific moment of the play. So he waits behind the inner door of the presidential box till there's one actor on stage, actor Harry Hawk, who comes out and says his line. He calls one of the other characters a sock-jologizing old man-trap, which the audience thought was hilarious back then. So masked by the laughter, Booth opens the inner door, walks up behind President Lincoln, and shoots him right in the back of the head. Lincoln slumps over immediately, never regains consciousness throughout the night. In the box with President Lincoln was his wife, Mary Todd, and then also an engaged couple that the president had invited, Major Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. So Major Rathbone grapples with Booth and tries to stop him from escaping and gets slashed up the arm by Booth's dagger. And then Booth jumps from the balcony down to the stage. It's about a 12-foot drop. He gets the spur of his boot caught on the blue Treasury Department flag there in the center, tearing it, lands to the ground with a thud. He then stands up holding the bloody dagger that he used to stab Major Rathbone and yells, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always the tyrants." So what Booth is doing there, he attributes that quote to the play Julius Caesar, where Brutus assassinates Caesar. So he's comparing Lincoln to Caesar because he doesn't agree with Lincoln's policies, working towards ending slavery, making society more equal.
So after Lincoln is shot,
Yeah.
they bring him across the street to this house, the Peterson House.
Yes.
And then actually just that window up there is the death room or the death bed. So
Yeah.
tell us sort of what happened once they brought him here.
Yeah. So when they're crossing the street, they don't know specifically which building they're going to. There's actually several boarding houses across the street. One of the boarders staying here, Henry Safford, sees the commotion in the street, and he knows that there's an empty room here in the Peterson house. So he beckons them inside. He says, "Bring him in here." And Lincoln's brought to the very back room here in the Peterson house. So Lincoln was shot around 10:15 in the evening over at the theater. It's not until 7:22 in the morning that he passes away. So he passes away about an hour after sunrise, hangs on for about 9 hours. Throughout the night, the doctors are continuously clearing the clot on his wound on the back of his head, and that's to relieve the pressure on his brain and stabilize his breathing a little bit, but they're really delaying the inevitable.
So I saw a picture where there were a lot of people that came in through the night to check on him or to pay their respects.
Yeah.
What happened after all of this? So a couple of days later, tell us a little bit about John Wilkes Booth's journey.
Yeah, so John Wilkes Booth, he runs out of the back of the theater, and there's a 13-year-old boy holding his horse at the back of the theater. And he's able to ride out of the city, escapes over the Navy Yard Bridge into Maryland. It kicks off a 12-day manhunt before federal authorities finally catch up to him in a tobacco barn in Virginia. In the tobacco barn with Booth is one of his co-conspirators, David Harold. Harold was part of Booth's group of conspirators, and he was assigned to go with Lewis Powell, a different assassin, to assassinate Secretary of State Seward at that same time. But he leaves as soon as he hears the screams inside. Powell makes it all the way up to Seward's room, stabs him in the face and neck several times, but Secretary of State Seward does survive. So because Harold's outside, he's able to meet up with Booth, and he's in that tobacco barn. The Union Cavalry have this tobacco barn that's about 90 miles south of Washington, D.C. They have the tobacco barn surrounded. They tell the two conspirators they need to surrender, and they have 15 minutes before they're going to burn down the tobacco barn. Harold wants to surrender, but Booth does not. So Booth tries to stall. He's like, "Oh, I have this broken leg, why don't we all line up and have a shootout?" And of course, the Union Cavalry isn't having any of that, so they light the tobacco barn on fire. And then as the tobacco barn's igniting, David Harold surrenders, but Booth kind of stays in the tobacco barn, kind of milling about. One of the Union sergeants, Boston Corbett, is staring through the slats of the barn, and he sees Booth starting to raise his gun and starting to approach the door like he's going to try to shoot his way out. So Boston Corbett decides to shoot Booth before he can cause any more harm. The bullet goes through Booth's spine, and he falls to the ground. The soldiers then drag Booth out of the burning tobacco barn, and he lives for about 3 more hours before he passes away on the porch of the Garrett farmhouse.
So a tragic story, like just thinking about all the people that were affected and how we lost a president there. What happened to the theater after this is all over?
Yeah, so after the assassination, the theater owners do try to reopen. They have a play planned for 3 months after Lincoln's death. And they start receiving a lot of backlash. People saying, how can you open this place where the president died, where this horrible tragedy happened? One letter even threatens to burn down the building. So the federal government ends up leasing and then purchasing the building, becomes an office for veterans' pension records. And at that time, they tear all the ornate woodwork off the railings of the theater, collapse the original presidential box, and section the building off into 3 separate levels. It stays as that federal office building until 1893, when they're having some work done to the building. They're doing some excavation down in the basement to add electric lighting, and that causes the collapse of all 3 interior floors. So another tragedy that happened here. 22 government employees died, over 60 were injured. So a very, very unfortunate event.
When did the National Park Service take this place over, and what do you use it for now?
Yeah, so the National Park Service doesn't take the site over until 1933. It opens as a museum in 1932, and then the Park Service takes over its management in 1933. And then it's not actually until the 1960s that the theater itself gets transformed back into a theater. And that's only after 20 years of lobbying through Congress to get a little over $2 million to do the renovation on the inside. And ever since the renovation in 1968, we've been an active theater that people can come and view plays and enjoy it in the same way that Lincoln did.
And they can come here also to take a tour, to see the museum, to hear Rangers talk about this place. So it's a place where the story is kept alive.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to talk about goal number 16, which is social justice. We're going to talk about hope and kindness. So the story here is tragic, but what the National Park Service is trying to do is to tell the legacy of Lincoln, what he did for humanity. So we want you to think about people in your community that are doing really great things. How can you elevate their stories? How can you tell these stories so that people will remember them? How can you emulate things that people are doing in your community that are very worthwhile? How can you show kindness and give hope to a world that's sometimes not very hopeful? We want you to use all the resources that you can find at Ford's Theater to learn more about the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, and then share with us at Dacia 92, and you're going to tag Ford's Theater at the bottom of the screen. We want to know how you're going to continue the legacy of people in your community that deserve it. So Ranger Lauren, we have students out there that want to be a ranger. They want to wear your flat hat.
Yeah.
So can you look at the camera and give them some advice on how they can get to your job?
Yeah, definitely. So I always tell people volunteering with the Park Service is a great thing. It can really help you experience what the Park Service is like and the great things that we do. I actually initially went to school to be a high school math teacher. It's a very demanding job, and you should thank your teachers for everything that they do. So I decided I wanted to do something a little bit more laid back, where I'm still interacting with people and helping to educate them. And so that's why I started volunteering with the Park Service, to kind of see what it was like and get some experience doing that. So that it's definitely something I would recommend to anyone interested in the Park Service.
Well, thank you so much for having us here today. We're excited to learn more, and we're going to stay the rest of the day and hear more about Abraham Lincoln and his legacy. Thanks so much for joining us today for the National Parks Expedition Challenge. This is Dr. Drizzle and Ranger Lauren, and we're out of here.